Are there questions for either Alan or John? If you could introduce yourself, say who you are before you answer the question. This is all being recorded, so that's important for us. So does anyone have any questions? As I said, we'll be going later on into a broader conversation around the themes that are here.
Harman Sager, economist at Department of Culture, Media and Sports. I think the first question is, and there'll be some. I've got three questions. One's an observation, I think. I think the question is, in terms of the measurement that takes place. I think the question always is who's asking the question. And I was wondering if you found that, depending on who's asking the question or value, you get a very different approach to the measurement that takes place. Mm-hmm. And linked to that, I think, is obviously coming from the government. One of the things I kind of found missing from this paper was actually the government's approach to value and measurement, which is set out in the Green Book in a very specific way of addressing issues of value. I think linked to that, the other parts of government, such as health, education, and the environment, have some very specific ways of tackling this approach, something that the culture sector doesn't have,
right.
And somewhere we're probably a lot further behind to tackle this problem. But having said that, there are techniques that we use that are economic-based, and that's where one of my kind of final observations is I still think within the sector there's a bit of a mix-up between economic impact and economic valuation, something I picked up in your report as well. And I think economics needs to get over that, and also I think the sector needs to kind of understand that economics does have a role to play in actually valuing the cultural impact that's in play. But
I told you that contingent valuation would come up. I knew it.
And I think that's the kind of the final thing. I think what I quite liked about your paper is the fact that you've ruled out the word intrinsic, which I think is quite useful.
Sure.
It keeps getting used quite a lot, and actually it doesn't really help when you're actually getting into measurement.
Sure. Thank you for your questions. I'll let John speak to the question of economic value. But of the three senses of cultural value that we talk about at the very highest level, the value to individuals, the value of organizations, and the value to society of a thriving sector, I think it's actually the third sense of value that we did not review in our report that is critical for a public agency to support. Which is, what is the value to society of a thriving sector? So the building blocks of value, I mean, it might be helpful to think of it from sort of microcosmic to macrocosmic, right? So the atom, the smallest atom of value is an individual's interaction with a cultural work. It is inherently personal and time-based, and it all emanates from there in terms of repeat exposure, the benefits to an individual, the family, the community, and society. So where would a government agency focus on that continuum? Well, we need to research all of it from microcosm to macrocosm. But the complexities of measuring at the microcosmic level are almost overwhelming. It's not to say they aren't complex at the social level, but there are precedents in other fields, as you note, for measuring outcomes at the societal level. So who's asking the question is a great issue. Most patrons, visitors, audience members, cooperate with research because they wish to support the organization that they have patronized. And organizations, a lot of cultural organizations are surveying their audiences either to collect demographic information or more and more now to get feedback on the work itself. So it's an exchange, I think of it as a reciprocal exchange of an expression of loyalty on the part of the audience member. And when the organization is respectful about asking questions, as reflected by good questions, respecting privacy, the process of taking a survey can actually be part of the engagement cycle, as I noted. So who's asking the question really is the organization. Organizations tend to put the logo of their funders on their surveys, and I always cringe when I see that because they're trying to get legitimacy, which they don't need. I believe it's the individual organizations' exchange with their audience and visitors that is the critical currency in gaining cooperation with research. John, do you want to speak to the economic question?
Yeah, I can basically just briefly say that we did kind of categorically rule that out, economic valuation and also kind of social returns at the outset, basically because there have been some other fairly recent literature review, for instance, Dave O'Brien's that looks at those methods, and we felt that our charge was to fill the hole in this particular place. So yes, we do skirt around those issues, and as Alan also said, we do realize that they are obviously interconnected in various ways. So I'm not sure that's satisfactory as an answer, but.
Question over there.
Patrycja Kaszyńska, Cultural Value Project. You, Alan, indicated that part of the problem, if not the whole problem we are having, stems from the fact that we try to develop an analytic approach to study synthetic phenomena. Cultural value has holistic, complicated outcomes, and slicing it up is very problematic. So a lot of our energy is spent on developing typologies, taxonomies, various types of indicators, and so forth. But I wonder if in itself this has to be a problem. I think a problem is that we conflate that a lot of those analytic constructs are defined for decision-making frameworks and not value assessment models, assuming that the two could be separated, that some kind of a neutral Archimedean point could be found when we talk about value assessment model, which is not used for decision-making process. Then we would discover that indeed there are multiple facets of outcomes that pull in opposite directions. As you indicated, quality and impact pull in opposite direction. Probably reach and quality would be difficult to square. But basically the problem is that we are not gonna get a decision-making framework. And what we are constantly trying to do is get one through research.
Yeah. Thank you. Assessing impact for the purposes of reflective practice of organizations is very useful, can be extremely useful. Our framework for creative capacity includes an element of critical capacity. Organizations of all kinds that ask questions and expose themselves to criticism of their core work are stronger organizations, not just in the arts. So why any cultural organization would be exempt from evaluation or critical feedback is a mystery to me. Assessing impacts for the purposes of accountability to external stakeholders is a whole different ballgame. And I think that's where we have to be very careful about defining indicators. Typically, marketing directors oversee research because they know the most about it. They design survey protocols, they measure indicators, and all of a sudden present them to artistic leaders who are like, wait a minute, how can you hold us accountable for that? So there's a whole dialogue around accountability at the organizational level, and then a whole nother conversation about accountability at the national level for outcomes. So I would just make that distinction as impact measurement for reflective practice, which is impact measurement for accountability as being two different concepts. So I don't know, John, do you have anything to contribute on that?
Okay, let's take one more question. We'll have a chance to come back to this a bit later on. Yeah, there at the back.
Hello, my name is Jane Bryant from Artswork. I'm interested in the relationship between audience and participation. And I just wondered if any of your studies uncovered more deeply, I suppose, what the relationship is between going as a member of an audience and participating in cultural product. You talked about consumers and product. How broad was that? Did you uncover any difference for impact on individuals between going as an audience member and participating in cultural activity?
Yeah. Great question. John, would you like a first crack at that?
I can say that was very much one of the questions that we were also interested in, and also in looking at comparisons or studies of different disciplines and how perhaps different sets of impacts would come from different disciplines. But what we found is basically the lack of agreement among different studies in terms of the constructs that they're using and the methods that they're using to assess impact makes it very difficult to compare the studies with one another. So there are some studies that are more focused on kind of active participation and others that are more focused on reception. But there's very little that we can say about comparing those at these points. But I think it would be possible to design those studies and to do them. We didn't come across them as part of this literature review. Perhaps other people know of them. But it was absolutely a question that we were looking and hoping to find an answer for, but didn't feel that we had much to work with there.
Right. I'll just say it's tricky to say that sitting in an audience is not active. To characterize that as a passive activity is not helpful. And many audience members object to that. But when an individual contributes something to the creative work itself, by making something or in co-creating or being involved in some way, there is literature to suggest that another level of meaning can be accessed in terms of creating something of your own that is an expression of yourself and the identity development outcomes that are associated with that, and up to and including legacy outcomes, creating something that is a legacy, which are unique to participatory involvement. But teasing out the additional impacts of participatory involvement is really tricky and very much a need for additional research.